What should the expectations be for the Detroit Lions in 2025? There have been a ton of speculation about how this team will be. Of course, at the start of the offseason, they lost Ben Johnson, they lost Aaron Glenn, they lost Frank Ragnow, they lost Kevin Zeitler, and there was a lot of negativity going around that the Detroit Lions would massively regress, that the Detroit Lions would not be the team that they were a season ago. And those things only continued throughout the offseason. A lot of media outlets, a lot of content creators, and really the hot take of the summer for the NFL was that the Detroit Lions were not only going to regress heavily, but that they were going to miss the playoffs entirely. But then the NFL draft happened, then free agency happened. The Detroit Lions added depth, they added talent throughout the preseason. We saw not one, not two, but several of the Detroit Lions rookies and second-year players grow into great guys. We've seen in training camp guys like Terrion Arnold grow into larger roles and improve their skill set, and the expectations got higher, especially from Detroit Lions fans. Now all of a sudden fans are saying, okay, well, we could still be that NFC contender. We could still be that 15-2 team that we saw a season ago. So today, I wanted to take a look at what the expectations should be for this team, what is realistic to expect from this franchise in 2025, and really what we should expect from the Detroit Lions as they go through the NFL season. So, with that being said, let's get right on into it. Now, the Detroit Lions have grown significantly over the last couple of years, right? In 2021, they were 3-13-1. They weren't very competitive. They weren't very good. And while they were quite scrappy, they weren't winning very many football games, right? Their tie was a 16-16, sloppy game versus the Steelers. They only had a few wins versus a few really poor teams. And one of those wins came against the Green Bay Packers, playing half of their backups in the last game of the season. In 2022, they made a massive jump to 9-8. They finished the season on a 7-2 run and were just half a game away from a wild card spot in the playoffs. That was one of the hottest teams in football, and truly, I believe if they went into that playoffs, they likely would not have won a Super Bowl, but I do think they would have won the first round of the playoff games, escaping the wild card because they were just that good in 2022. They were that hot, they were that dominant, and truly they were a very, very strong team that year at the end of the NFL season. In 2023, the Detroit Lions went 12-5. They went to the NFC Championship game. They won their first playoff game, and they were one of the best teams in professional football. And they followed it up with a 2024 campaign which saw them go 15-2, not only taking their second NFC North crown, but their first number one seed in a very, very long time, if not for the first time ever. Now, in 2025, the offseason, a lot of things changed. John Morton took over as the offensive coordinator when Ben Johnson left. Kelvin Shepard took over as the defensive coordinator when Aaron Glenn left. Frank Ragnow retired. Aidan Hutchinson returned in. There was a youth movement on the Detroit Lions, in particular on the interior offensive and defensive lines. There was a lot of draft capital put into it. There was a lot of young players brought in to fill those roles of aging veterans, and there are some new looks on the offensive line. There are some new players on the defensive line, and there is going to be quite a bit of growth going on this season because Tate Ratledge is young. Christian Mahogany is young. Even Graham Glasgow is not young, but he is at a new position. Tyleik Williams is relatively young. Ahmad Hassanin is brought back, and he is very young. There are a ton of youth players and a ton of younger guys being brought into this roster as the big contracts are coming, as Aidan Hutchinson has his big extension coming up, as Kirby Joseph signs his, as Brian Branch and Sam Laporta and Jameson Williams and Jahmyr Gibbs all get ready to sign a major contract. The youth movement has expanded in Detroit, and they're looking to get younger at certain positions. They're looking to get cheaper at certain positions, and really, they are looking to get better as a team while getting younger. So, what are the expectations this year? Well, from a record perspective, I think winning less games and losing more games is the natural progression, right? Not only is it unlikely that the Detroit Lions repeat as 15-2, I would argue that it's nearly impossible. The Detroit Lions play 3 true Super Bowl contenders this year, maybe a couple more depending on your definition, but really they play 3 major Super Bowl favorites, right? That being, of course, the Ravens, the Chiefs, and the Eagles. That right there is probably 3 games. That's assuming you go go 6-0 in the division, again, in a very tough division with Minnesota, Chicago, and Green Bay. That's assuming that you go, undefeated versus some good playoff quality teams, right? Like the Commanders, like the Rams, like the Bengals. And that's, of course, assuming that you dominate the teams that you should be dominating, like the Giants, like the Cowboys, and like the Browns. Now, we'll go through a schedule in a little bit, but 15-2 is relatively unlikely. They could very well still have a winning record. They probably should still have a good winning record, but 15-2 again is just likely impossible to repeat if you are the Detroit Lions. It doesn't happen very often. Offensively, I think regression in points and yards is certainly something to expect. Be going from the highest scoring offense in the 17-game era, it's going to be tough to top that. It's going to be tough to improve upon that. Being second in the NFL in yards gained is going to be tough to repeat. But with the talent the Detroit Lions have, I see no reason that they should not repeat as a top 10 to even a top 5 offense in the NFL. They have all of the talent in the world with Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, who are a top 2 running back duo. Amon-Ra St. Brown is top 5 at his position. Jameson Williams is top 10 at his position. Sam Laporta is top 7. And even with the youth on the offensive line, even with Christian Mahogany, even with Tate Ratledge, even with Graham Glasgow moving to a new position, this offensive line should still be above average. I would expect this offensive line to finish somewhere around number 10 in the NFL. Not nearly as dominant as they have been the last few years, but still very good. Still giving Jared Goff time in the pocket, still being a big part of this offense, and being a great part of the offensive success that we are going to see from the Detroit Lions this year. They are top 10 to top 15 at every single position on offense, despite some offensive line question marks. Every skill position and the quarterback is a top 10 player at their position in the league, and they should be a top 10 to a top 5 offense yet again. With a good play caller in John Morton, there is no reason that this team should not succeed offensively and should not be putting points on the board and sustaining long, fantastic drives. On defense, obviously last year was a bit of an anomaly due to the injuries, but even so, they were pretty good. They were 7th in points allowed, and overall were quite a solid defense statistically up until about the final couple weeks of the NFL season. With that being said, returning to the Detroit Lions defense is a top 5 player in the NFL in Aidan Hutchinson. DJ Reader, Ali McNeil, and Tyreek Williams make up a top 10 defensive tackle group in football. Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell make up a top 10 linebacking duo in football, and certainly if you throw on guys like Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, Grant Stewart, and the rest of this linebacking core, it is easily a top 10 group in the NFL. You look at Kirby Joseph, who's a top 3 safety, Brian Branch, who's probably a top 5 safety, DJ Reed, who I would argue is a top 10 to 15 cornerback in the NFL. And again, you look at this defense and you say, well, at every level and at every position, they have a player that maybe isn't top 5 to 10 at their position, but is certainly top 15, top 20 at their position. And as a duo and as a room, like in the case of the linebackers, easily a top 10 room in the NFL, even if the individuals don't quite make up and crack that list. So there's no reason the Lions shouldn't be great on defense as well. Taking a look at the coaching staff and some of the changes that they've made, John Morton, of course, is a big one. Kelvin Shepard, of course, is a big one at defensive coordinator. But even outside of those guys, David Shaw joins as the pass game coordinator, a longtime, well-respected coach at Stanford who coached Andrew Luck and a ton of great passing attacks at Stanford. Tashard Choice, right? A player that, or a coach, former player, and a coach that was working with Jahmyr Gibbs at Georgia Tech, recruited him to Georgia Tech, recruited and worked with Bijan Robinson and all of those great Texas running backs over the last couple of years. Casey Rogers comes over from a Tampa Bay defense that had a good pass rush a season ago and continues to get good production out of their guys. And the coaching changes have been mostly a net positive for the Detroit Lions. I don't think that John Morton and Kelvin Shepard are necessarily upgrades over what they had last season, but I don't think they're significant downgrades either. I think David Shaw is an upgrade. I think Tashard Choice is an upgrade. I think Casey Rogers is maybe not an upgrade, but certainly a very good hire for the Detroit Lions. And there is no reason the Lions should regress from a coaching standpoint this year. So going in to the schedule, what should the Detroit Lions expect? What should fans expect for the Detroit Lions this year? Well, I think there are a lot of win games. I think there are a lot of games that the Detroit Lions should win and should expect to win fairly handedly. I think those games are Chicago, Green Bay, Minnesota. I think they should easily handle Cleveland, Dallas, New York, and the Steelers. I think that's 7 wins right there right? I think the Bears, the Packers, the Vikings, Dan Campbell only one time in his NFL career has gone under 500 versus the division, and that was in 2021, his very first season as the Detroit Lions coach. Last season, he was 6-0 in one of the toughest divisions in football, and before that, I believe he was 4-2 and 4-2 in the division, maybe even 5-1 in 2023. But overall, Dan Campbell wins in this division. Dan Campbell owns this division and has owned it for the last 3 seasons. Now, with that being said, I do not expect a full sweep of the division like last year. I think going into some 50-50 games, you take a look at Tampa Bay, who's a good football team. I think the Lions are better, but Tampa Bay beat them last year. Tampa Bay played them in the division around 2 years ago, and every time they play the Buccaneers, it's a close contest. It is a close game, and I think it's a true 50-50 game. The Green Bay Packers, I fully expect to split with. The Minnesota Vikings, I fully expect to split with. And the Chicago Bears, I think it's very easy to look at and say, yeah, that team's talented. They added to the offensive line. They have a talented quarterback. They have a talented receiving core. And even if their defense isn't necessarily the best from the pass rushing standpoint, their secondary is quite good. Their linebackers are quite good. And I could see them splitting with the Chicago Bears as well, going 3-3 in the division. 4-2 probably is the expectation. I think, 3-3 is at minimum what should happen for the Detroit Lions, but I don't expect to sweep the division like they did last year. And I don't expect nearly the level of dominance that they saw over the last couple of years throughout the division. Washington, I think, will be a tough matchup. Cincinnati, I think, will be a tough matchup. And the Rams are going to be a tough matchup. Both times the Lions have played the Rams, it's come down to a 6-point victory. The Detroit Lions won in overtime in week 1 last year, and they won by 3 points in the playoffs 2 seasons ago to get their first playoff win in a very long time. Those are tough games, right? And then, of course, you have really tough wins where I would almost expect the Detroit Lions to lose against, the Chiefs, against the Ravens, and against the Eagles. So when you take a look at their schedule overall and their opponents, I think you have 7 wins right here between these teams. So you beat the Bears, Packers, Vikings once. You beat the Browns. You beat the Cowboys. You beat the Giants. You beat the Steelers. You go into this other group of games. I think even if you go 50-50 in these games, right? Say you lose to the Packers, the Vikings, and the Commanders, but you beat Tampa Bay, Cincinnati, and the Rams. Well, now you're at 10-7, or I guess technically 10-4 at this point before even going into your toughest games of the season. And again, say you go 1 game here, right? You upset one of these teams, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Eagles, which is not beyond possible, right? It is not impossible. The Lions went to Kansas City 2 years ago and beat the Chiefs. The Detroit Lions haven't beaten the Ravens, but in 2022, they were really close. It took a game-winning, record-setting field goal from Justin Tucker to win that game and put the Ravens over a much less talented, a significantly less talented team than what the Detroit Lions have right now. And the Eagles are a good team, but they've lost a lot on the defensive side of the ball. And I think there's no reason to expect that they should dominate the Detroit Lions or guarantee a victory over Detroit. So say they win 1 game right there, that's 11-6. That is a playoff berth. That might not be best for, division title, but that is certainly enough to make it to the playoffs. That is certainly enough to make it to the wild card. And they are probably going to be one of the more dangerous wild card teams when they actually get to the playoffs. Overall, I think their floor is easily 10-7. If they do not win one of those tough games, if they just win the games that they should and split 50-50 with the games that are a bit tougher, they will be 10-7. I do not see a world where they are less than 10-7, and I do not see a world where they do not make the playoffs this year. I think their offense, their ceiling is 14-3. I think you win a majority of those 50-50 games. Say you beat Tampa, Washington, Cincinnati, the Bears, the Vikings. And then, of course, you win several games, 2 out of the 3 of the tough wins against Kansas City, Baltimore, and the Eagles. I think that's very realistic to happen, but obviously on the upper echelon of what this season could look like. I think you should expect a top 10 offense, a top 10 defense, and certainly a playoff team as the Detroit Lions. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions on the Detroit Lions season, what your expectations are, and what you think they should be. And I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions!